Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for taking some time with us today to chat. We've got kind of a full agenda, but before I kick off, let me just talk to you a little bit about the purpose of this meeting. Is we have a budget process at the university, and Jen Steele is graciously here to talk to us a little bit about that in a moment. That budget process at the Central University, of course, affects the resources that are available in the college. However, there are places where we can make strategic investments in the college to further all of our goals and to further our mission in general. And so what we're going to do here is go through an agenda where Jen will talk a little bit about the university budget overall. Then Donna Liebecker, so Jen, by the way, is the Chief Financial Officer for the campus, if you're not aware. Donna Liebecker, who is our acting VPR, is going to talk a little bit about changes to the F&A return structure for the campus, and so that'll be good. And then Fred Parrish, who of course is our UBO, will go over the sort of budgetary implications for the college. And frankly, Fred will do a lot of the talking on that because he's much more conversant with the details of it. So I think it'll be pretty productive. I wanted to make sure we got this in before everybody went their ways for spring break. And so if I forget to say it at the end, a happy and healthy and very safe spring break to you. So Jen, I'm going to start sharing my screen here. And there's the agenda that we talked about, so you can see everybody's name. And then Jen, I will go ahead and just turn this over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Scott. It's great to be here today. And I'm going to try and go through a high-level overview of the university's budget outlook. And starting, this is what has emerged out of the JFAC legislative process. So
hey, Jen, I'm sorry to interrupt. I forgot to say one thing, which is if anybody has any questions for Jen, we'll have time for her to take a couple right after she's done because she's got to get about her day. So if you have anything as she's speaking, please feel free to type them in. If you don't think of something for Jen till later, please type it in anyway, and we'll forward that question to you, Jen. Sorry about that.
Okay, yes, always welcome. Questions are always welcome. So what has emerged out of the JFAC committee process, and I think is being heard by the House today, is a 5% CEC, which includes a 3% across the board piece, and then a 2% merit piece. That the 2% merit piece will be distributed in a matrix format based on a combination of performance rating and market of the position relative to comps. So HR is working on that schedule right now. There's also a health insurance increase this cycle. And then for the first time in many, many years, JFAC has approved or moved forward a fund shift. So that is providing appropriated funds even on the tuition and fee revenue as part of our appropriation. So that's a positive thing. We also received an enrollment workload adjustment of almost $1 million. And there are limited line items moving forward out of the JFAC process. So a nuclear engineering line item, that's a partnership with U of I and the INL. And then also one-time funding to start up a forensic pathology lab in the Eames complex. So the JFAC recommendations still need to move through both chambers and be signed by the governor. So we're hoping that we get some news about that this week. We can go on to the next one, please, Scott. When we were building our forecast for the coming academic year, we also projected modest increases in both undergraduate and graduate enrollment, returning to pre-COVID service and activity levels, full funding of contracted positions out of the gate, and then a 50% split on appropriated salary savings We've done that, we did that this year, and that helped shore up our budget deficit. And then we also have built in fringe rate increases driven by those health insurance increases. So next slide, please. I won't go into detail on these, but these show at a high level our revenue and expense trends. And these are based on the governor's budget recommendation, which is slightly different than what came out of JFAC, but the trends are still very applicable. And so when we look at the tuition and fees line, you'll see in fiscal year 21 and 22, we had a bump, and that was driven primarily by expanded growth in our Albion Center. Going into next year, before any tuition rate increases, we're expecting a drop off of the Albion revenue, and that will be offset to a degree by our projected growth in undergraduate and graduate enrollment. The appropriations of note is in fiscal year 21. There was a dip due to the furloughs. We're moving on to the expense, and you'll see again in the 21 line a dip in the contracted wages. That was due to the furlough program. And you'll see the large increase in 23. That's based on our line item funding, the CEC, and those types of expenses. So at the end of the day, our forecast for fiscal year 2023 is about a $6.8 million deficit. That is before we implement any tuition rate increases. And part of why you see that the positive outcomes in 21 and 22 is we received substantial COVID grant revenue. And so we are not expecting that in the coming year. So we're looking at a $6 or $7 million deficit, and that is still significant progress over the $16 million deficit we faced just a couple years ago. And it also tells us we still have some work to do to create a balanced budget. We can go on to the next one, Scott. So the balancing levers at play are based on the information coming out of JFAC. We do not believe we will have the ability to increase base undergraduate resident tuition and fees, but we can increase the graduate fee, non-resident fee, and professional fee increases. So we're considering for our graduate and non-resident students an increase in the order of magnitude of 3.1 to 4.9%. And then the professional increases really vary by program. Those proposals or recommendations will go to the Board of Education for approval in April. Then we also propose using our reserves to shore up any deficit after our tuition increases. Rather than going through budget reductions, we really want to give our budget model advisory group time to put together all of the pieces of a comprehensive budget model. So that's good news. No budget cuts for this cycle. However, we are also putting a pause on strategic investments. So that's new central funding for initiatives. And that is because we do not have a source of funding because of our projected deficit. We do anticipate that this is just a temporary pause. And as part of our budget model that we're building, we are intending to provide an ongoing source of revenue for strategic investments. And then finally, these are the guidelines that we've shared for budget development for the coming academic year. Units, colleges need to work within your existing base budget for your general appropriations. And then for your local and auxiliary operations, you will, as usual, develop your revenue estimates and then build your expense based on those revenues. You'll have access to 50% of your salary savings on appropriated positions and full savings for local and auxiliary funds. And again, no new funding, but as Scott mentioned, we're encouraging units to look holistically across all your resources and revenue sources to find opportunities for resourcing your strategic priorities. And I think that's it.
Let's see, I'm gonna stop the share. I think that's it too, Jen. Logan, is there any questions that anybody's typed in for Jen?
I do not have any questions.
Okay, well, I do. So, Jen, I think there's the math in here gets a little bit tricky, and correct me if I'm wrong. So our budgets are due out of the college to you by Friday, correct? If we have identified positions that will be vacant by then we retain 100% of that salary savings. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. I just didn't want that to confuse, because we're going to talk about that later. I didn't want to confuse anybody. Anybody that leaves us in the college after Friday or announces that they're going to leave. So we've had a number of faculty, and Fred will talk about this, that have announced that they're going to retire. And that creates that 100% salary savings for us. Anybody that leaves for whatever reason after the 18th, then we split that 50%, right?
That's correct. And just another point of clarification, you still retain the full permanent line, but during the course of the year, we split the savings 50-50.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's a really good thing to note. Well, thank you so much for taking your time with us today, Jen. I really appreciate all your hard work and look forward to working with you some more on that budget model.
Okay, thanks everyone.
So for those of you, I'll kind of highlight some things that you may not be aware of. So there's a collection of various campus leaders. Fred's on this committee, I'm on this committee, and a number of other folks. I think the president of the faculty senate's on this committee, and we're all working together to devise a new budget model for the university as a whole. And so just so you understand that there's lots of different angles of people coming in with ideas to this process. And I think it's so far been a very productive process. So that's how we're kind of getting to a new model. I will also say, since Jim brought it up, the line item for the nuclear engineering did make it through JFAC. Hopefully the House supports it, because if the House supports it, the Senate's almost certain to support it. And that will be a total of, I believe, $1 million. We get about half of that in for ISU. And Donna can correct me here in a moment, but I believe there's a radiation safety specialist that will be hired as part of that. And then the other hires on the ISU side, as well as the U of I side, will be related to folks related to nuclear energy and nuclear engineering. We're working closely with INL to identify kind of their needs as well, and put that into the calculations. So we haven't decided exactly what flavor of most likely engineers will be there, but that will add, if it passes through, we think it will add 2 faculty members to COSI in kind of that nuclear energy space. So that's what that line item is about. It's a pretty exciting opportunity. So with that, I can't do that though. I can't ask you if I'm muted. So I would ask you to come on and just talk to us briefly about the new Fna model, so that this is another important budgetary thing that I think folks would like to know about.
Thanks, Scott. And I know I have one slide, so if I could get that, would be great. Perfect. So I'm sure you have all been to one of the town halls or faculty senate or one of the multiple locations where we have discussed this, but after about 1.5 years of working through this, we have a finalized new Fna model. So I want to just briefly talk through what the current model is and then what it will be shifting to for next year, so starting in July. And then also a few caveats to that. So as this slide shows, currently we have 35% that goes to the Office for Research. And I should note here that the darker orange, or the headers, this category here falls under Office for Research. So these should total out to 35. Don't try and add up the entire row, right? So Office for Research gets 35%, about 10% of that goes to administrative staff, contracts, CAIUs. I say about 10% because obviously as prices shift, the percentage shifts a little bit. So that is one of those slightly flexible categories, just depending on what happens with pricing. Research centers, core facilities, grant development gets 14%. Currently, internal grants, we spend about 11% on that. The next big category is research overhead and general university support. It's been set at about 13.5% of late. Grants and contracts accounting gets about 16.5. A lot of that is actually salaries. Colleges get 30%, library gets 5%. So after having discussions with multiple entities, the new classifications that we have come up with for the FNA model, 39.5% will go to the Office for Research, and the extra 4.5% that we're pulling is actually coming out of what used to be classified as overhead, as research overhead and general university support. So this 13.5% that we have been putting into research overhead and general university support for the last few years is now going to be divided. 4.5% will go into research infrastructure for the Office for Research. We haven't fully identified what this 4.5% will go to. We got a lot of requests for grant writing help. So that is one of our target entities. We also got requests for bridge funding. So those are probably the two big or most frequent requests we got. We also had some requests for tech transfer. There's a few other little pieces. So starting in July, when we make the switch to this new FNA model, there will be some determinations made about how that 4.5% gets spent. And I should also say that that 4.5% is going to be reevaluated in 3 years. And if the places where we have put those funds aren't really helping to improve research opportunities for ISU, then we will reevaluate and redistribute those funds into other places. The other two big changes, research overhead and university support is going from 13.5 down to 4%. As I said, that is the number that's being redistributed. And then we're also adding 5% to PIs. When we talked to the different entities within ISU, this was the #1 request. PIs wanted a benefit from applying for grants. It makes sense. It allows flexibility for travel. It allows flexibility for publication costs, a number of things that it's been really hard to fund over the last few years. So this gives PIs the ability to have a pool of money that they can dip into when they need some of those resources. Grants and contracts accounting, people still want to be paid, so that one's stable. Colleges are still getting 30%, libraries still getting 5%. So really the three big shifts are this additional 4.5% going into Office for Research, the reduction in overhead and general university support, and then the addition of 5% to the PIs. If anyone has any questions, I am more than happy to address them.
Thank you so much. That's really good stuff, Donna. And just as a note, and anybody can tap a question in it if you want during this time at the college level. So of that money that comes back to the college, and we keep 2/3 of it and put 1/3 out to the departments. And the departments I leave that up to their discretion as to how they want to parse that money out. The only caveat that I have is it needs to go to in some way to support research. It can't go into some other, other sort of miscellaneous fund. So it really does need to support research. And then we will talk, Fred in particular, will talk here in a moment about what we do with that FNA return that comes to the college. So it's clear what we've got going on with that. Logan, are there any questions for Donna?
We have two.
Great.
The first one, what are the anticipated consequences of reduced funds to general university support?
That's a great question. And Jen Steele and I have had a number of conversations over just this question. We have used those funds to pay for things, of course, electricity, whatever. So we are going to have to fund those things out of other sources, which you know, if we do that through figuring out if we have pockets, if we maybe reduce the amount of energy there's a number of ways that we can do that, but it's true that it is going to come out of the bottom line for the university.
Can I just speak to that real
Sure,
quick?
Fred, please.
Make sure that there's clarity. We've called that here research overhead and general university support, which is what it should be called, because those are central money. That's the percentage that has gone to the central university to cover the, you know, whatever, accountants in the finance office and the power bill and all those kinds of things. So there's no, the question, what are the implications of reducing that? There's no direct implication of reducing that to the PIs or to research in general. That reduction, those costs have to be met elsewhere, so it contributes to the overall deficit situation that the university faces. But there won't be a direct implication of that reduction. No one's going to say, well, crap, we can't do that now because we cut that from 13.5 down to 4%. And Jen, it might still be on here. She can correct me if I said something wrong there, but hopefully I didn't mischaracterize that.
You're right on track, Fred.
No surprise there. Is there another question, Logan?
Yeah, this one is a two-parter, excuse me. So did Donna say part of the 4.5% of research infrastructure was going to bridge?
So I said we've had requests for bridge funding, not the bridge program at ISU. I'm thinking that's what the question is asking. So bridge funding, in particular, a lot of the requests that I've gotten have focused on the animal facility. So for researchers who are between grants, but are still using the animal facilities, if there's some type of funding that can help pay for that, we classify that as bridge funding. So it's looking at how we can help out with some of those situations.
Okay, and the second part, is this research support a strictly educational function?
I'm not sure I understand that question.
Okay, they said you answered it with the first part, so you're good.
Okay.
Right.
Perfect.
Excellent. Well, hey, thank you so much, Donna. I really appreciate you taking some time. And I want to really thank you and thank the Office for Research for being so supportive of the college. We've done a lot of hiring lately, and back when I was serving in Donna's role as well, it was easy for me to share Office for Research money with the college, right? but Donna has really done a nice job of continuing to support our startup packages, and so the generous startup packages we've been able to give to our new faculty would not have been possible without your support. So thank you very much, Donna.
It's our pleasure. We appreciate all the great research that comes out of COSI.
We're doing a lot. It's getting better every day, and
It is.
we're all grateful for that. So that's awesome. So thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, so now we're just going to hop right in without further ado, and I'm pretty much going to let Fred drive this conversation and kind of editorialize as necessary. So I will just, Fred, let you take over.
Okay, so we wanted to, in addition to talking about look ahead to our budget in the next year, we also wanted to provide some context by taking a look back at what has happened with our budget over the last several years. And there's a few key things that I wanted to point out from this table showing our budget. The first is that we took a gigantic budget cut from FY20 to FY21. The university, you know, this was shared across units all across campus in the wake of the COVID and the developments there, and just to fix the structural deficit overall, right? So the college took a just under $1 million budget cut, and you can see that on the top line. Most of that was in personnel. You can see that total 15.6 drops down to 14.7. that, well, we'll come back. So the other thing that we accomplished, though, that's really important over this span of years is that for many years, the whole time that I've been in the college, frankly, the college itself never really had an operating budget. We relied on vacancy savings every year that we didn't know for sure if we would get, but kind of hoped we would get and thought we'd probably get. We never knew how much they were going to be, and we didn't know what our cut was going to be of it to fund the operating needs of the college as a whole. And that was not a great situation. So one of the priorities that Scott gave me to work on, and it's been very good, is creating for the college an operating budget. And you can see from FY20 to 21, you can see that college operating budget carved out essentially from vacant position salary savings that we've been able to realize and then move toward operating budget. And we'll talk more on the next slide about how we've spent that. One thing that I wanted to point out here that's really important is that line that shows the departmental operating budget. It shows a decrease from 250 down to 192, which has everyone right now thinking, hey, wait a minute, they took our money. That decrease is 100% due to the communications charges. So when the university stopped charging the departments for phones and other basic communications, that budget was left in the college. So rather than leave that in the departments to pay for an expense that you were no longer going to be charged, we used those savings to help create this college operating budget that is really critical to meeting the needs of the college that we'll again talk about in just a minute. Last year, there were no salary savings. So it's a good thing that we had that college operating budget created, because had we not had that, I'm not exactly sure what we would have done, given the fact that, vacancy salary savings were swept last year.
Yeah, and I really want to emphasize how important that is, because you will see in the next slide that Fred will go over the investments we were able to make last year, even though we didn't have substantial hundreds of thousands of dollars in salary savings. So it really did. Fred doing that really made a big difference on our ability to strategically invest last year, and we'll continue to do so going forward.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. We'll show some detail on that. I wanted to also point out, you see this big decrease from 20 to 21, and then you see it start to go back up again, which is true. That's all attributable to the CEC. One of the things that is kind of weird about our budget, if you look at it in terms of managing the college, is that the budget over the years, other than we had this big budget cut a few years ago, every time we get a CEC, most of our budget, 90+% is in personnel. So that results in a significant increase in our budget every time that happens, which is great. We're really thankful for it. But it's not money that we can then just directly sort of use somewhere else, right? So there are years where we'll say, for example, this is a flat budget, but then it turns out, well, it wasn't a flat budget. There was a big increase. Yes, but that increase was all in the personnel lines, which means that, effectively it's a flat budget. We can then sometimes use that CEC money later on down the road when there's personnel changes or whatever. So it is an increase to our budget, but those increases don't necessarily lead to some new thing that we can do because we have all this new money. So I like to point out that that's an important part of understanding what's happening here. The last thing here then is, Jen mentioned this earlier, for 23, or excuse me, for 22, you can see here, and then also again for 23, we did have access to our planned vacancy. That's what I call this distinction that Scott drew earlier between money that we know we're going to have available from vacancy when the budget is submitted versus unplanned vacancies that arise after the fact. So we had that in 22, that access to the planned vacancy savings, and it created for us a significant pool, about $400,000 that we'll talk about here right now, I think. Go ahead and roll the slide over. I will say, Logan, if questions come up, go ahead and interrupt me because it might be easier to answer. People are likely to ask questions pertinent to, you know, what we're talking about right in front of them. So I don't mind being interrupted to speak to stuff that's, you know, on the slide that we're looking at. So go ahead and do that. Okay, so we told you we would provide some additional breakdown of how the college has spent its operations, salary savings, and permanent research support money. And so this does that. So you can see some things that we've been able to fund permanently, such as the software support, Mathematica and MATLAB, which the college pays 100% for those site license for those two packages that are so important to what we do. That before, I mean, we paid it. Well, we didn't. MATLAB, we actually kind of parceled out who was paying that. Mathematica, we paid it most years, but it was always a struggle to figure out how in the heck I was going to come up with that money. So that's part of creating this permanent budget, was made it easier to do that. We've been able to do a lot of computer replacement. We have a permanent budget now in place.
Yeah, and let me interrupt you there, Fred. And Jack, I see you're on here. Kudos to Jack Bradley for that. Jack has been super proactive on assessing our future computer needs and making certain that we keep current both for computer labs and for faculty computers. So thanks again, Jack, for doing that. And what you see is a big old expenditure last year versus this year. There may be a bit more to come this year, but probably not on that scale, just because Jack kind of did a really nice job of catching up on some of the backlog and preparing us for the future.
Yeah, and from my standpoint, it's been really great to have sort of a scheduled replacements, as opposed to, you know, before it was just kind of, well, catch can, and this guy's computer is broken and we need to fix it. And so having that set aside and a planned replacement schedule has been a real improvement. So a major expense here, of course, is, well, I can't quite see that whole question, Dave. Let me go into the chat here. Okay, I'll answer that, Dave, here in just 1 second. That's a good question. Oh, that was direct to me. So Dave Delahanty, I'll come back to that question in just 1 minute, Dave. I wanted to mention, before I get to the investment initiatives, talk about startup. We spend a significant amount of money on startup. You can see that in 21, this amount for startup that was spent from this appropriated source was only $5,000. We covered the rest from our F&A return. And we'll talk about the F&A returns in a minute, but from 21 to 22, we've moved our startup support from the local funds, the F&A, over to this appropriated money, because we've got those salary savings to do it with. But that startup is a big piece of where this money goes. The next thing here is these investment initiatives. And so Dave Delahanty just asked, what's the relationship then between where we're here saying that we funded these strategic initiatives versus the university saying that the university is not funding any strategic initiatives? And to this front, I think a real kudos is due to our central financial management right now, that gives to the college the budget and then says, within this budget, operate, make the decisions that you need to make for the year. And so within that budget, we have had opportunities to make strategic investments, largely as a result of our retention of the vacancy savings, although some of this has been funded by permanent money that we've set aside. So we can fund strategic initiatives at the college level, even when the university overall has said we're not going to fund those things centrally, you know, or at least, you know, in the past few years they have, but in the next year they're not. But we'll still have some, because we've been given leave to manage the budget that has been entrusted to us. And we'll look here on the next slide, we'll detail what the college has done with that money for each of the 2 years in question here, the 156 and the 205. One of the things that I wanted to point out, and we'll talk about this, address this in more detail later also, is that for 22, one of the major expenditures went toward adjuncts. We have an adjunct budget, a permanent adjunct budget. This 120 overspend in 22 is over and above what we had set aside for adjuncts. We'll look at that in more detail in just a minute as well. Any other questions about this slide before? There's a lot here. I want to make sure anyone that has questions about what we've looked at so far has a chance to chime in before we bounce over to the next. Okay, and we can come back if we need to also, but okay, so as promised, this here we provide some detail just to really, I appreciate Scott's transparency on this. You know, we're just going to tell everybody exactly what we did. This is where we spent what on the last slide we'd called investment initiative. So this is over and above kind of the more routine operating items that we fund with that operating budget. We put a call out in the spring of 21 to utilize some of the funds that we look like we were going to have available. And you can see here each of the departments that benefited from that. And if any of you want more specific detail on what these items were, we can provide that, but we don't need to go into all of that here. But you can see it was spread pretty broadly, that $156,000 in savings that we were able to use to fund. Some of this is instructional equipment, some of it is research. Oftentimes those two things, you know, are the same, but some really important things that we accomplished for this year. Then in 22, that savings that we anticipated for this strategic investments have gone toward the physical sciences remodel, which is going to greatly, well, I'll let Scott talk about that.
Yeah, let me just jump in there. There's a couple of things here that I want to mention, Fred. On 21, that was a really interesting year because we didn't keep any of the salary savings, if you remember. But because nobody was traveling, right? So we weren't paying that out of the college budget. I mean, there's just all this sort of weird COVID related stuff that normally we would have spent a lot more money out of our standard operating budget. And we didn't, largely because of COVID, right? And that really gave us some degrees of freedom to do some other things that you see and really support education and research in the college. Now, the physical sciences remodel, that's basically two things. So I believe I've told everybody in our last town hall, we will be, as soon as all the furniture gets in, moving over our office over the first floor of physical sciences, where the physics department once had their space. And you know, I fully admit that we're doing a little bit of displacing to physics, but we tried to keep that very minimal. And we're creating another office for the physics department chair, who's Dustin McNulty has been kind enough to step into that very important position for us. So Dean's office money accounts for some of that, in renovating things to give a better conference room and a workroom for everybody, including physics. The other big part of that, big chunk of that, and somewhat bigger chunk of that is rooms 106 and 107 in physical sciences were really quite underutilized. And so what we're going to make for that is in 106, which is a great big room, it will accommodate electrical and computer engineering faculty researchers and their students, as well as computer science faculty researchers and their students. So we're creating a big shared lab with some graduate student bullpen space. And then 107, which is a much smaller room, will be graduate student bullpen space as well to meet the needs of physics and other departments in COSI. this has happened because we're hiring in so many research active faculty who are replacing folks who have not been research active for a time and so don't have labs. And so we still remain in this really difficult space crunch in the college because we're providing great startup packages, but if you're going to spend your startup package, it'd be good to have a lab to do your research in. And so we're really trying to balance all of those things off against each other so that our junior faculty can come into ISU and be successful, as so many of you have. Our grant productivity is up. All this investment is paying off for the college for the long term. So I'll leave it at that. You want me to go to the next slide, Fred?
Yeah, great. This is yours to mostly talk about anyway, Scott. So this is what we've done with adjuncts.
There's a couple of things happening here. So we really budgeted, we cut back because of the budget cut. One of the primary places we cut back was in the support for adjuncts. And we did a great job last year of staying. And then frankly, this is completely on me and just a combination of not really paying attention as I should have. So I take the blame for that. But also, you know, meeting some really serious needs in some of our departments because retirements put a real pinch on us. So I don't know that we could have ever made that budget given the number of retirements that we had last year and the holes that we had to fill. But that's on me that we overspent it by that much. We'll be fine, but I will be paying a lot more attention and have talked to department chairs about that going forward. And I think the mentality that we have to take is adjuncts are great when we're in a real deal pinch, but otherwise we can't come to rely on adjuncts as I would argue we had, as is indicated in FY20. We need to figure out our curriculum, our teaching loads, our the pace at which we deliver courses, all this kind of stuff, so that we use that adjunct budget in the college only for real needs. I will say that I've done one other thing that's partially inflated this budget a bit, is for computer science. There have been a couple of folks that are INL employees who have been very excited to adjunct for us. And I've made the decision as an investment to do that, to further this really growing relationship that we have with Idaho National Laboratory. So I will probably continue to do that, but we're that investment, but we will need to pull back. And so be ready for that when it comes for the fall and you're talking to your chairs, that this sort of free flow of adjuncts is going to have to get cut back significantly. Fred, do you have any other comments on that?
No, just that, you know, that money, any amount that we overspend the budget, it just comes out of what we can do. Because people might look at it and say, well, it looks like you've got the money. And that's true. And as we look at the slides going forward, we'll show you that we have some funds next year. But, you know, we also have an adjunct budget. And if we go over that adjunct budget, it decreases what we can do, you know, in these other areas that are.
Yeah, it reduces our strategic investment for other things, right? And that's one of the reasons that I elected to cut it, and then I'm a bit chagrined that I allowed it to balloon again. So we'll be keeping a closer eye on that. Okay, and now Fred, you can talk a little bit about the FNA situation. I will say from my perspective, the really good news is that FNA rate, although from 22 to 23 is estimated, we don't know yet. So it's kind of benchmark on 22, I believe. But what you can see is as our research productivity and our external funding has really gone up in the college in the last few years, we were also reaping that reward of that FNA return, which is crucial to continuing to support the research enterprise. So I'm very heartened by that and hopeful that that FY23 figure is actually bigger than what we thought it was going to be.
Yeah, here's hoping. FY22 is actually an estimate still also, because we're only partway through it. I'm okay estimating 22, but when I estimate 23 based off an estimated 22, that's when I just say, I'm just going to leave that flat. I don't want to look that far into the future, but hopefully with COVID coming off, that will help a bunch too. So this,
just to say, we can't, sorry, Fred, we can't budget that. And this is kind of what happens when you've got somebody who was a VPR for too long as your dean. We don't collect FNA a priority, right? The FNA that we get from NSF or whatever other agency, that overhead comes after the money is spent. So that's why we can't predict. We know what grants are out there. We know how much FNA money is out there, but it all depends on you, how you as the PIs spend that money as to what the university and ultimately the college gets back.
Right, that's right. So that top line there, that FNA line, this is only, as Scott mentioned earlier, the college retains 2/3 and passes 1/3 through to the departments. This top line here, this is only the 2/3. We're not going to address here with what your departments have done with their respective 1/3, some of which they sort of retain at the department level. In some departments it's passed through. It's different in every case. So this is the college's share of the FNA. And you can see here, as I mentioned earlier, a big chunk of this goes toward startups. We have in the past had to use startup heavily, or use these FNA money to pay for startup. We're transitioning off of that. There wasn't enough there to do it anyway. And so we've started using the appropriated funds more for that. But you can see a really significant contribution to our startup packages from the FNA.
Yeah, and I'll point out on that note, just to give everybody a little context, is if the remaining searches that we have out in computer science, electrical and computer engineering, and the math chair search are successful, that will be about, I have to look at the exact numbers, that will be about right at 30 new tenure track research active faculty that we've brought into the college since I became dean in the fall of 2018. That's essentially a quarter of the tenure track faculty in the college, give or take, right? So you can see, because we want our junior colleagues to be successful in research, that makes that investment in FNA really high, because of FNA really high in startup, just because of the demand that has been created over the last 4 years.
Yeah, it's a good problem to have. Good new young faculty who are doing great things. Figuring out how to pay for that is a nice problem to have. Okay, the next line there then are the block grants. So we give back to the departments a share of this FNA by way of the block grants. And you can see that in 21, that amount was a lot less. That was mostly driven by COVID. I mean, you got the travel and other things that money tends to support. It was just not happening as much. So, but we anticipate next year that'll be around 120 that we'll fund. You know, the italics means we don't know for sure, but that's what we're thinking, that we'll fund back to the departments for block grants.
Right. And again, just so everybody's on the same page with what those block grants are, before I became dean, the college, I think, had a history of running kind of a small grant competition. And I reflected upon arrival about the amount of work it took to write those grant proposals, and the fact that our review process was not particularly selective, right? It was pretty much you put something across the transom. If we had money, you got your reward. And I just decided that was an immense amount of work to place on the shoulders of already busy faculty for a relatively limited amount of money. You can argue whether that was right or not. I'm happy to have that discussion with anybody who'd like. But it really reduced workload on both the front end and the back end of it. And so what we've done now is we put that money out in a formula that's not perfect, that kind of reflects past usage of those mini awards, current research productivity, new faculty. I mean, it's kind of a kludge of a mathematical formula that allows us to determine how much we're going to put out to each department. And again, much like the F&A return that the departments get, I leave it to the discretion of the chairs, with the only requirement on that part is that they give me a small report at the end of the fiscal year detailing what they use that money for, just so we make sure we're kind of keeping it aimed at research.
Yeah. Okay. So then the next line there is just operating. You can see that's gone down. Again, the operated and the local is they work together, right? They pull the yoke And so as we've created that operating budget on the appropriated side, we've shrunk the need to use this F&A money to meet, our basic operating expenses. And so that's a good thing, because that then frees this up to do other, less predictable items. That last line, then, that's part of that, those other initiatives, is the spending out of those individual mini grants, and then just a few other stuff that the dean, approves that comes through. You can see there on the bottom line then a deficit in these prior years. And that was planned. Both Scott and frankly other leadership who had foresight about what was going to happen with the hiring in the college knew that we were going to need some reserve in place to cover startup for hiring. And so a reserve was built over some years, and we have spent that down. We've spent our local funds in a deficit in order to meet that reserve for the last few years. We won't have to do that going forward, which is good. As you can see in 23 at this point anyway, we're anticipating, about $40,000 that we don't have committed yet. May end up being more than that if the F&A is indeed higher, but it's nice to have that flexibility.
Well, and Fred, you're being typically modest. I'd like to take credit for having Fred do that, but frankly, Fred had took his own initiative really before I became dean to start doing this in anticipation. And I was very supportive, and we've continued it. But Fred, you kind of get a lot of credit for making certain we've been able to do everything with startup that we have.
Well, thanks. It's worked out well. I mean, on the one hand, I have nightmares about startup, because from a budgeting standpoint, it's the worst. I'm sure I can't see everybody's face, but some of you might be rolling your eyes right now, because we never know. You make this commitment, but you don't know how much people are going to spend, or when they're going to spend it, or if they're going to spend it. But we have to plan for it, and it's really super important. But budget, we like certainty, right? And startup is anything but that. So, but it's been good. I mean, being able to fund the equipment and the grad students and stuff that's been done with that money has been impactful. You can see that payoff on the top line here, where that that research productivity gets turned up, and we see good things happening. So, okay, go ahead. Now we've done all that. Let's talk about where we're going in the future. So for 23, the appropriated budget is flat, save for the CEC, right, that we're going to get. Jen talked about that earlier, and that's amazing, great, really important, but it doesn't do anything for us from a planning standpoint, because that'll all go into salaries. So we've talked about this already. We're going to have 100% of our planned vacancy stuff that I know about already. I've already put it in. If you know about something else, tell me, but I won't say don't tell me, because I've already put it in. But it is due tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, and I've already put it in. But so that I've put in, that includes the sabbatical savings. We get to retain 100% of the sabbatical savings. And then throughout the year next year, we'll achieve some additional unplanned vacancy savings. So the next 4 slides we'll move through then. We take the college's appropriated budget, when I say the college, I mean the college level stuff. And we break it into these 4 pieces for planning purposes. We can move between these, but it helps us to understand what we're going to do in order to break it into these pieces. Go ahead, Scott. First piece, this is the permanent operating budget for the college office, more or less, right? We pay travel, the marketing and development, and then the office operations. Some of these things, the marketing and development, were paid in the past by our local funds. And so being able to move that here is useful. This is all committed. We anticipate that our development officer and marketing people will spend that. But we do have now about $100,000 budget to fund the college's operations. Go ahead, Scott. The next piece then here is what we call the college's instructional budget. So here we have this top line are, permanent salary savings that we've achieved that we have not already allocated to something else. So when we replace a senior faculty who's making 90,000 with an assistant professor who's making 70, we get to keep that 20,000 permanently. And so we get to put that in this unallocated salary line. And so that kind of is there year over year to help us. And then we've created these other permanent funding lines. This is where the adjuncts that we talked about. We have this $178,000 that stands as a permanent operating budget to fund needs throughout the college. As you can see there, that the software will come from here, the accreditation stuff and engineering will come from here, computer replacement will come from here. So there's about 140 there that is unallocated, uncommitted as of now going into next year. The next piece then is, in addition to creating a permanent instructional support budget that can support the college overall, we've created a permanent research support budget. We've used this the last few years to pay for some additional GTAs, GRAs in some different areas that needed it. This is unallocated for next year. We have not made any determination as to how this permanent research support money is going to be spent next year. Go ahead. And then the last piece is the vacancy savings. As of right now, our vacancy savings going into next year are anticipated at 658,000. There's 172 that we've already committed to some specific commitments that the dean has already made to fund some strategic initiatives. And then we've got this 295 is some of that's already committed. Some of it's kind of an estimate because we still have searches going and we don't know exactly how much is going to roll into next year and so on, but about 295 committed to startup. So there's about 191 of this pool that is uncommitted. So go ahead. So the total there of those 4 slides, if you didn't have your calculator out, adding them up as we click through them, which I didn't warn you, so you probably didn't have that. That totals up to just under $470,000. That is going to be within the college that we can invest as we need. We can combine those monies, so it's the total that really matters. That number will change over time. We might have some additional turnover that will cause it to grow, and also grant buyouts and other things. So don't get hung up specifically on that number. It will change, but it's a good size number. And with that, I'll leave that to Scott then to talk about how he envisions rolling that out.
Yeah, so the decisions that we've made, we really didn't know in FY21 with COVID, and as crazy as that year was, we really didn't know that we would have that sort of largesse at the end of the year. It wasn't really anticipated, and so we had to move pretty rapidly. I think we started about this time 2 years ago, asking for, or this time a year ago, asking for ideas to support the to support the departments in your research and instructional efforts. This year, I knew I had to make room over in physical sciences for research, and I also had to get computer science moved out of the College of Business, because when we divorced computer science from informatics out of the College of Business, part of my commitment to the College of Business and to computer science was that I would find them a home in Cozy. So they will be moving over into the Dean's Suite now, where we're sitting currently as we go over into physical sciences. So those were both needs that just absolutely had to be met. So we didn't really spend much time talking with the departments about how to spend that. But I want that to be different this coming year. I can almost guarantee you that I will need to spend some money in combination with maybe some of the faculty who need lab space, to create more lab space, suitable lab space in the college than we have right now. And that again just goes to feeding that need for many of our new faculty. So I'm sure some of that money will go for that. But most importantly, I think if you could work within and among your departments over the course, maybe even of the rest of the semester, to start to get some ideas kicked around. You don't have to have them finalized. I will ask for and then if you work with your chairs to kind of capture those ideas, right? I will work with the chairs and with any of you who want to put your 2 cents in to get ideas to us for investments in education and research next year. So I really want that input onto what we see as important things for the college. Remember, this is one-time money, so it's not really useful for another line or something like that, right? This is really one-time equipment or refurbishment or a whole variety of things like that. But I will tell you that if a single department comes to me and say, I need a Who's It's for one faculty, the odds of that being an investment of the college are probably relatively low, right? If if 3 departments come to me and say, I need a Who's It for 10 faculty, and it's really going to increase their research or teaching productivity, then that will resonate with me and with the chairs, I believe, in a much more profound way. So think, that's a good bit of money. It's not an infinite amount of money, but think what we could do, what we could invest in that could really move the college forward. And maybe it's a new program, maybe it's equipment, and by program, I mean a research program, a collaborative research program. Maybe it's an investment in equipment. Maybe it's to fund an innovative new curriculum that you want to talk about developing. So I'm really very open and want your input on that. Finally, and this is the last slide I've got, and then we can certainly take any questions that you have. Back to the renovations, the dean's office stuff is done. There's a conference room and a workroom that the dean's office will share with physics. And once we get all of there's this supply chain thing is caused a little havoc for getting everything in time. Once we get all of our furniture in, we will be moving over there, hopefully before the end of the semester. And so I think that's going to be nice. We'll have an open house or some other kind of party over there, depending on when we get moved over. Then there's these labs for electrical and computer engineering and computer science. This lab space, that renovation will start in April and be done by the end of the fiscal year. We are creating that physics and overall college GTA space in room 107. And then we're creating a physics chair's office in room 124. Now, the final piece here, we're not on the hook for financially. This is coming out of central administration funding. These are terms that I should have taught this in this slide. We're going to renovate student spaces, and this will begin in May of 22. But I want to move us as a college beyond thinking of student spaces in terms of one department. I think we all realize that the world of science and engineering is increasingly collaborative, and that the most successful educators and researchers are often the most collaborative. And so I really want these spaces not to be, this is for physics, this is for geosciences, this is for engineering, but to be places that are welcoming for students of all different disciplines to circulate through. And we'll discuss that a little bit more later. So with that, that's all I've got. And Fred and I would be happy to take any questions that have come in, Logan.
We do not have any questions.
We're questionless. Well, all right. Either we've done a really good job of explaining to it, or everybody's eyes glazed over several minutes ago. Well, I'll wait for a couple of things or a couple of minutes to let people sort of join. One of the things I'd like to do, and I'm gonna do, oh no, Cam, did I just ask you to unmute?
You bet. Hi.
Hey, okay, perfect. So I want to introduce Cam Jones, or not Cam Jones, that's actually my nephew, who was just texting me about Bob, the Kansas City Royals just pulled Greinke back out of the fire and he's on the staff now. So anyway, inside baseball, literally. Kim Brooks is our new director of development for the college. And I'll let Cam say a little bit about himself in the next minute. But here's the thing. Us being successful in fundraising from either industry or individual philanthropists or philanthropic groups is dependent upon Cam knowing what some targets of opportunity are, right? And so Cam works closely with the chairs, but often you as faculty and staff may know, hey, Bob over there started this engineering or chemical firm or whatnot and is retiring and talks so fondly about ISU when I see him. That doesn't mean that Bob is gonna give anybody any money, but it means that Cam can reach out to somebody that you might know and develop a relationship and see if they're interested in supporting us here in the college. So Cam, with that, I'll turn it over.
Yeah, thank you. That's well said, Dean. So I'm excited to be here. I've met some of you. I think I've met with most of the chairs, if not all of the chairs at this point, but excited to meet and work with all of you. So please don't hesitate to reach out if there's something I can do to help you. Got about, well, over 17 years of fundraising experience with colleges of science and engineering. So I'm excited to work with ISU and with each of you. And I met some great alumni so far and some great donors already. I've been on campus since, well, just mid-January. So I'm pretty new to Pocatello. So anyways, I look forward to working with you all.
Perfect. And we're super excited to have Cam. Again, don't be shy. Just drop him an email and say, hey, I know this person that might be a good connection. And Cam will be delighted. Evan, I'm going to surprise you. I'm asking you to unmute, if you will. I'm going to surprise you and say a couple of kind words that will likely embarrass you. So Evan Johnson, who has been Fred's sort of number two on the financial end of things for quite a while now, and has been absolutely invaluable to the college, especially, I mean, on his own for sure, but especially since Fred has been kind of stretched being the UBO for the college, for the Office for Research, as well as the athletic department. And I think Fred would attest that without Evan's smarts and dedication, that would have been a really hard slog for him in the college. So Evan, thank you so much. And I really appreciate everything you've done for us, and good luck in your next endeavor.
Thank you.
All right, I've got a couple of other things and then we'll see if we get, I want to make sure I give proper chops to April Robinson, who always does everything. We lost Jenny Overrocker to another position just not very long ago, and Jenny was really a vital part of the team. It's, part of this, frankly, is people are following the money, right? And so it makes it tough in our situation, which is why that 5% CEC is particularly vital to keeping around great people like April and like Evan and Jenna Lee. But April, puts all my slides together and generally puts up with me and keeps me on track. And so again, doing this kind of an event would be super difficult without her. And she spends a lot of time and a lot of care. She's led these remodels that we've talked about and really been kind of the program manager, project manager for those. So thanks so much, April. And then I'll also thank Logan McDougall. Logan, you for just helping to kind of pull all this together as well. Logan, do we have any do we have any other questions that come in?
Yes, we've got one now.
Okay, super.
What is the share of the Idaho Falls campus in COSI's plans for research and student spaces?
Read that again for me, please.
What's the share of the IF campus with COSI's plans for research and student spaces?
Well, there's no share that we have identified. I'm working very closely with the other deans and the provost and president to develop a plan for Idaho Falls. Many of you who have been here for a while know that our Idaho Falls campus used to have a couple thousand students enrolled there, and has dropped precipitously for a variety of reasons that many of you know, and those that you don't probably aren't that interested in. I've gotten a lot of history lesson on Idaho Falls, but it's absolutely key. You know, its proximity to the Idaho National Lab is absolutely vital. And it's important for our Polytechnic initiative. It's important for a variety of things. So we're really working very closely on how to revitalize our efforts in Idaho Falls. We are doing a space study that the main campus is paying for, or it's not a space study, really a design study with a couple of architecture firms to determine what a new engineering and other stuff building that could support our research efforts in Idaho Falls and our teaching efforts might look like, and our collaborative efforts with the lab and industry in Idaho Falls. So there's a lot of churn in IF, and my plan is to have our next college-wide town hall that week right before classes start in the fall in person. And by then, I fully expect that we will have a much better articulated plan for the future of Idaho Falls, for Cozy, and for the university as a whole. Anything else?
There's no more questions.
Okay, great. Well, everybody don't hesitate to reach out to me. And I think one of the things that I'd really like to call out, we have a number of colleagues that are retiring. Gene Stuffel, I saw you on there earlier, and your long dedication to Idaho State University will really be missed. And so thank you for everything you've done. There may be other folks who are stepping away shortly that I'm not seeing, but thanks to all of you for your dedication over your careers to ISU. But mostly I want to call out Bob Fisher. Bob has been just incredibly valuable to helping me really understand and I hope grow into this role. And Bob's going to be retiring at the end of the semester. It's a big loss for our college, but I'm happy that Bob can go help his wife Kathy in the garden, or just sit around and watch baseball while Kathy works, and whatever, and play a bunch of music and just have a good time. So thank you, Bob. And if you'd like to say a couple words to everybody, that'd be great.
Well, thank you, Scott, for the honor. I've been honored to work with you, and I will miss folks. So those of you that I've had the pleasure of working with on a regular basis, it's been an honor for me, and I know at some level I'm going to just miss it. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Bob. Thanks for everything. It means so much to all of us. All right, if there are no further questions, then I will let you go. Be safe, be happy, be comfortable, be warm, be whatever you want to be, but have a good spring break and finish up the semester strong. And I'm always here if you want to chat. April's great at finding time. So please don't think that I'm too busy to talk to you individually, because I'm not. All right. Thanks, everybody. Take care.